Hey everyone, welcome. Today, we're going to break down a really foundational piece of law. This thing is basically a legal shield that's been guarding India's incredible biodiversity for over half a century. We're talking about the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. So let's get into it.
Okay, so before we get into what the law is, we really have to ask why it was so critical. What was the big problem it was trying to solve? What was happening in India that made this kind of action so urgent?
And the answer, to put it simply, was a crisis. A huge one. By the early 1970s, India was seeing this absolutely shocking drop in its wildlife numbers. We're talking wild animals, birds, the whole lot. The situation was getting pretty dire, and it was clear that the country's natural heritage was on the line. Something big, something nationwide had to be done. And that response, it came in the form of this grand new, really comprehensive law. This wasn't just some recommendation or a gentle suggestion. No, this was a legislative shield forged to stop that decline in its tracks and really actively protect the nation's incredible natural heritage. So what exactly is the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972? Well, at its heart, it's the basic legal playbook for, well, pretty much everything to do with wildlife conservation in India. It lays down the rules of the game for protection, for management, and for cracking down on illegal trade. Now, here's something that's really interesting, and what gives this act so much weight. Its power is actually anchored directly in the Indian Constitution. It creates this kind of two-way street for responsibility. On one hand, you've got Article 48A, which says the government has a duty to protect wildlife. But then you've got Article 51AG, which makes it a fundamental duty for every single citizen, too. It's basically a shared national responsibility, woven right into the fabric of the country. Okay, so we know it's powerful, we know it's constitutional, but how does it actually work on the ground? Well, its real strength, the secret sauce, if you will, is this really clever tiered system of protection. This is the core of its power, so let's break that down. The whole system, the entire thing, is built around what are called the 6 schedules. The best way to think about them is like different security levels. Each level provides a very specific degree of protection for whatever species is listed inside it. This right here, this is the absolute heart of the law. So here's a quick look at how it all breaks down. You've got Schedule 1 and Part 2 of Schedule 2. These are the big ones. They offer absolute protection and carry the highest penalties for animals like the tiger or the dhole, the Indian wild dog. Then you move down to Schedules 3 and 4. These animals are still protected for sure, but the penalties are a bit lower. Then you have something totally different in Schedule V, which lists what are called vermin. Think common crows, mice, which can actually be hunted. And it's not just animals. Schedule V protects specific, rare plants from being cultivated. It's a really, really comprehensive system when you look at it. Let's just look at the two extremes to make this crystal clear. On one end, you've got the tiger, right there in Schedule I. It gets total, absolute protection. If you harm one, you're facing the absolute harshest penalties. Then, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have animals like mice and rats in Schedule V. They're classified as vermin and can be legally hunted. This really shows you just how flexible and nuanced the act is. Of course, a law is only as good as the people who enforce it, right? It's just words on paper otherwise. So the act was smart. It also set up a whole crew of specialized bodies. Let's call them the wildlife guardians, the ones whose job it is to bring this law to life. First up, we have the Wildlife Crime Control Bureau, or the WCCB. The best way to think of these guys is like an intelligence agency, but for wildlife. They're the ones tackling organized crime, going after big poaching syndicates, and shutting down illegal trade networks. Next, there's the National Tiger Conservation Authority, the NTCA. Now, this body was actually born out of the super famous Project Tiger initiative. So, as you can guess, it has an absolute laser focus on one thing: protecting and conserving India's national animal. Then you have the Central Zoo Authority, or CZA. This is the body that oversees all the zoos in the country. They're responsible for setting standards, making sure things are run properly, and, this is super important, managing captive breeding programs, which often act as a last line of defense, a safety net for really endangered species. And last but not least, we have the National Board for Wildlife, the NBWL. This is the top dog, the apex advisory body. They're the ones guiding the government on all the high-level policy stuff, like where to set up new national parks and sanctuaries and how to manage them. They are literally shaping the conservation landscape of the entire country. All right, so we've got the framework with the schedules, and we've got the guardians who enforce it. But what happens when someone actually breaks the law? Well, that's where the penalties come in. This is what gives the act its real teeth. And let me tell you, the consequences can be really severe, especially if you're talking about crimes against those most protected animals we mentioned. For an offense involving a species from Schedule 1 or that Part 2 of Schedule 2, we're talking about a prison sentence that can go all the way up to 6 years. And it's not just about jail time either. For those same high protection offenses, the fines start at a minimum of 25,000 rupees, and trust me, they can go much, much higher. The main takeaway here is that the law sends a very clear message. Wildlife crime does not pay. Now, think about it. A law that was written way back in 1972 can't just stay frozen in time, right? The challenges facing conservation are always evolving, so the laws have to evolve too. And that's exactly what's happened. The Wildlife Protection Act has been amended several times to make sure it stays relevant.
Yeah, the Act has been consistently updated over the decades. You had key amendments in 82, 91, 2002, and 2006. And these weren't just minor tweaks. They introduced brand new conservation ideas, they strengthened protections, and they even created new bodies like the NTCA we just talked about. All of this was to make sure the law was keeping pace with a changing world.
That 2002 amendment, for example, was a really big deal. It brought in two completely new types of protected areas: conservation reserves and community reserves. This was huge because it opened the door for more local people to get involved in conservation. Oh, and it also expanded the actual definition of animal to make sure fish and other aquatic life were better protected. You know, when you boil it all down, the real spirit of this act is captured perfectly right there in the Constitution. That powerful line, it's a reminder that this whole thing isn't just about government agencies and complex laws. It's about a shared responsibility, a duty that falls on every single one of us. So here we are. After more than 50 years, this act is still an absolute cornerstone of conservation in India. But it does leave us with a really big question to think about. In today's world, with new challenges like climate change, habitats being broken up, and even new age poaching techniques, what's next? What new challenges does this historic act have to evolve to face now?